How are you managing your time? Welcome to the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. I'm Jono White, founder and principal consultant of Clarity. And by the end of this podcast, we are going to have spoken a little bit about time management, and you'll have 3 tips around time management. As I said, I run Clarity. I work with leaders around the world, in Australia where I'm based, but also US, UK, India, New Zealand, helping them to build leadership capacity in themselves, in their teams, and in their organizations. So when it comes to time management, how do you manage your time? I want to reflect on my experience in this, and that is to say, firstly, that in my experience, time management, what you hear out there, if you Google it, if you look it up, really hasn't worked for me. I've just found that, in my opinion, time management is a very case-by-case thing, because you've got to find what works for you. So when it comes to managing your time well, as an example, for me, I've found it really helpful to not fight when I'm in the zone and when I'm in the flow. Some people talk about, every great leader gets up early at 4 a.m. And I just don't believe that's true. I believe if you look historically at great leaders, I don't think that pattern would be 100%. I think maybe a majority of great leaders are early morning people. Maybe you could argue that. But one story that comes to mind that I love is that Winston Churchill used to actually, during the most frenetic times of World War II, he would actually do his work in bed until 11 a.m. Or there's a movie, I think it's called Trumbo. Apologies if I'm getting that wrong, but something like that, about a fantastic writer who would do his best writing in the bath and at random times. And so for you, when are you in your flow? That's the first tip. When it comes to time management, I want you to think about, when are you in the flow? When are you in the zone? Because leverage that. Find a way to do more of that. And how do you recognize when you're in the flow? Because when you are, what does it look like to just double down, triple down, quadruple down on just like, boom, I'm in the flow. What do I need to get done that's really important while I'm in the flow? And learn to plan around that. So for me, learning to leverage that means that late in the evening, I'm a big fan of Premier League. So sometimes I'll just get in the zone with Clarity work. And late in the evening, particularly on a Saturday night, so I'll put on the Premier League and I'll do a bunch of work around 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., which is really unconventional, but I often just find that I have all these thoughts. I love watching the Premier League, so I'll have the Premier League on in the background. I'll be pumping out a lot of work. So time management, first tip, is work out when you're in the flow. The second tip is to find some great tools or strategies. So an example of that is Pomodoro. When sometimes it's great to say work when you're in the flow, but sometimes you're in a job and you just need to get 150% done in 100% of the time. It's a losing battle, and you're going, Jono, the flow thing sounds great, but I need to rock up to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow, and I don't have, I'm not running my own business. I can't choose to work my own hours. There's some sense of needing to just get things done during the day. So finding some tools that can work for you when you are in a position where you just need to pump things out. So let me tell you about Pomodoro. Pomodoro is this idea of doing short bursts of work with little breaks. I've found this, once again, you've got to find the tool that works for you, but there are some great tools that when you're in a position where you just need to pump things out, even when you're not in the flow, I'd highly recommend something like Pomodoro. For me, I would often do 15 minutes or half an hour with a 5-minute break. Sometimes as long as 45 minutes with a 5-minute break. You want it to be long enough that you can get a lot done, but short enough that it gives you an impending deadline of when you want to get whatever you're currently working on done. The beautiful thing about Pomodoro is sometimes it helps you to get into the zone, and then you find that you're then suddenly smashing it out. And if you want to add a bit of fun, then whenever I do it, whenever my alarm goes, I always shout, Pomodoro! Which also makes it a bit fun and really silly. And that gives you a bit of an insight into how I work. Okay, so that's the second tip. I highly recommend Pomodoro, but find a tool that works for you, particularly if you're in a role where you can't just focus on leveraging the time that you're in the flow. And the third tip is use collaboration. So a lot of people I find who struggle in time management can also tend to be very collaborative people. Now, that's not a rule, but it's a bit of a proverb. In my experience, people who are great at smashing out work on their own, they're super organized, they may be really good at time management when it comes to particularly tasks, but some people go, you know what, I really struggle. I struggle with time management. And if I was to ask you 5 or 6 follow-up questions, I'm sure a lot of the time what would come out is that you're an extremely collaborative person. And one of the challenges with time management might be that you're by yourself so much. So my question for you is, how can you leverage collaboration in your time management? How can you leverage collaboration in your time management? Because if you can find a way to collaborate, so say you're a leader of a company and you have an executive assistant and they're super organized, how can you meet more regularly with them? Or how can you leverage collaboration with your executive assistant to help you manage your time better? Maybe that's not you though. Maybe you have a colleague who's just organization 101 on legs, like they're just so organized. How can you leverage your relationship with them as a colleague to collaborate together to help you with your time management? Thinking creatively about a regular meeting, or asking them for help in terms of going through a bit of a list together and bringing them into your world, just to bring their organizational brain to what you do for even half an hour, and then just unpacking for them how much that helps you get things done and do a better job. So there are 3 tips. How do you manage your time well? I hope those 3 tips have helped you with your time management. If you are finding this podcast helpful, make sure that you subscribe, or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and follow and share this with anyone in your network who would get a lot out of this podcast. Thanks for listening and watching. Cheers.